Welcome to the Boomer Briefing Podcast, where we help you solve a critical business issue in 20 minutes or less. I'm your host, Jon Hubbard, shareholder and consultant here at Boomer Consulting. And with me today is Jim Boomer. Hi, Jim. Thanks for being here.
Hello, John. Happy to be here.
Most of you know, but Jim is the CEO here at Boomer Consulting, and he specializes in leadership and technology among several other areas. So this topic is perfectly suited for Jim, and that is how firms are approaching, or how they should be approaching, their long-term remote work strategy. And Jim, I'm not sure if you know this, but way back in, I think maybe November, I recorded an episode with Sandra Wiley on remote working. It wasn't such long-term focus, but now fast forward 6 months or so, which kind of feels like an eternity, around this topic. Firms are really starting to put thought and planning into, all right, how is this remote working thing going to look in the long term? Not just getting through the pandemic or transitioning back, but really the long-term strategy. So the first question I want to ask you, Jim, is why do you think it's important that firms really get intentional about developing a long-term remote working strategy?
Well, first off, you're right. It feels like it's been an eternity as we go through this and all the twists and turns. But for a lot of us, we had to respond, and we in reality, we're probably accelerated 5 years or more in this area. But frankly, all organizations should have been thinking this way pre-pandemic. But it's one of those silver linings in the pandemic that, it fast-tracked us and made us do this. The demand for flexibility and remote work was already starting to build. Statistics showed it growing every year, how many people were working remotely. So, we have to recognize that, yes, we either did a great job, an okay job, or a subpar job at responding. But as we go forward, things aren't going to go back to the way they were pre-pandemic. The days of demanding everyone in the office, I believe, are gone. You're certainly going to have people that want to and choose to be in the office, but to remain competitive and be successful, I think we're going to have to build in this flexibility and going forward. So, I think the other thing is a lot of organizations recognize many of the benefits of remote work. And at the same time, they saw that many of the challenges that were brought up by naysayers weren't that big of challenge. They weren't insurmountable, and they found ways to address those. So, bottom line, it's not something that's going away. So leaders need to be thinking about it strategically and developing a plan of how it's going to be successful in the future.
Right. And, not only is it not going away, it's also providing a great opportunity for firms in a lot of different areas. And, we can speak more on that. But as you are speaking with partners, firm leaders out there around this topic, Jim, what ideas are you sharing with them in terms of either, solutions, advice, tips on how they actually should be figuring this out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we all have the tendency when we think of remote work to jump right to the tools. So what technologies do I need in place? And how do I make it work? Well, even before the pandemic, technology was to a place where it worked. I mean, we as an organization had proven that. We'd been a virtual company for years prior to that. And we're not the only one. There were many organizations that had gone either fully or partially to a virtual environment. So, we all want to jump there, and it's important, but it's not the only piece of the puzzle. So the main thing that I would tell leaders is you have to think more holistically. So you certainly need to think about the technology. How is remote access? Like, are you going to go to the cloud? How are people going to get to the systems and the data and be able to do the functions that they need? That's important. But from a technology perspective, you also need to be thinking about workflow and project management. And how do you create transparency and collaborative environments where things are flowing digitally and people are aware of what's been done. And then communication is huge. And that plays into going beyond technology. You have to think about your talent in a remote and even a blended environment, as we go in the future, of some in the office, some that are working remotely. What are the talent implications there? And how do you lead through that? Processes are huge. Again, a silver lining is I think a lot of firms were forced to move into a more digital workflow. And I would encourage you, don't go back to the way it was, because those are the things you should have been doing even if you were in person, and will serve you well when you are in the office and you have people who are remote. And it's the way of the future. So really using this opportunity to up your game in terms of both processes, technology, and all areas of your firm. Very closely related to the talent is culture. Like, what does this do on the culture? And the last thing you want is two different cultures between your remote employees and those that tend to come to the office more often. And so really paying close attention to that. But bottom line, it comes down to a management and leadership challenge. And that's where most of your strategy should be focused. Setting expectations with your team and having policies that outline those and are clear. But also we're forced to truly manage, coach, and mentor, but also do that intentionally. And so my main point is to leaders is you have to be much more holistic in your view of this beyond just the tools that make it happen.
Right. And I'm so glad you mentioned that management piece there, Jim, because I remember, you and I have been working together for over 11 years. And I remember back in 2009, 2010, there, was kind of the explosion of social media in the workplace. And there were a lot of conversations. Should we let our staff do this? How does this work? And I remember from the very early days of that conversation, you were banging the drum of, this is a management issue. This is not a technology issue, that firms need to, understand it's how they manage this is the most important thing. And as I think about this move to virtual in firms, from my perspective, I've seen that this move to virtual has actually, in a lot of cases, exposed potentially weak management approaches that were happening in person. Would you agree with that? And do you see that?
I'd agree with that 100%. And I mentioned that we were already on the path to working remotely and being a virtual company. And if I think back on that path, we exposed multiple weaknesses in how we managed and how we relied on just being there and being in person, that we had to tighten up. So I'd agree 100%. And I think we're seeing an uptick in a demand for training to develop those management and leadership skills. And it's been important all along, but it's been put under the magnifying glass by the last year plus.
So as we see that uptick, obviously we're seeing more and more firms knowing that this is the direction they need to move, because maybe they're seeing some of those benefits already and they want to double down on those benefits, or kind of explore those benefits more. So Jim, with the firms that you're working with, whether it's in one of our circle communities, one of our circle meetings that you're, facilitating, or whether it's actually out consulting, what are some of the results and the benefits you see firms actually experiencing now that they are more strategically moving to this remote working strategy?
Yeah, yeah. Again, another great question. I'm going to start in the area of talent that I mentioned earlier, and there's two things here. One, I think when we expand our geographical boundaries of where we can successfully operate as a team, we open up our talent pool tremendously. So whether you're coming from the angle of looking for lower cost employees to add to your team, but probably more importantly, certain skills that maybe may not be in your local area, you can complement your team. You have access to that now. Even in mergers and acquisitions, what people were maybe focused in locally in their area because they were going to have to bring them into the office, you can think much broader than you did in the past when bringing new people into the fold. On the flip side of that, I think this is going to be a huge piece of the puzzle for retention of your top talent, because it's always been this way, but top talent has a lot of options. They tend to be the ones that are recruited by others. If they don't like what's going on, they can go out and find another job and someplace that does meet their needs. And so not all top talent is going to demand to work or really want to work remote all the time, but there's going to be a large subsection of them that do. And you have to be able to be flexible and respond to that. So it's both on the recruitment and retention side in the talent area. I mentioned this a little bit, but in process area, we fast forward in terms of the acceleration towards digital transformation in ways that would have taken years to get there. And again, don't go backwards. But this is all improved workflows. It's also gotten a lot of accounting firms up to the times in terms of how their clients expect them to work. We all have our smartphones. We all see digital self-service, the flow of information. And when we go to our accountant and it's all paper scanning, and it's a stretch to be able to even use a scanned document, you're like, this seems backwards. So really, in the process area, there's been a huge benefit, and there will continue to be so. So continue to push on digitization, automation of those processes, and it'll be a huge win. And then, everybody looks at the cost and time savings, and they recognize that. That was often when we talked about some of the silver linings or benefits of the last year plus, that often came up. But, you don't spend nearly as much time commuting to and from the office, and it hit them in the face of how much time they were spending doing that. And even going to a lunch meeting, like, people figured out how to connect on video and have valuable, meaningful conversations with clients and prospects virtually. And carrying that forward where it makes sense is going to be an important piece of it. So I don't want to shy away from the cost and time savings as well. And I could go on, but those are kind of the top things that I see and hear.
Well, yeah, and I'm seeing and hearing those same exact ones you mentioned. So, but I agree with you. There are many more we could discuss. Speak briefly about kind of how you're seeing this remote working shift, either already existing in other professions, or kind of, because, as accounting firms, we sometimes will think that we're trailblazers, or we're the only ones going through this, or we're the ones that are having to figure it out. But really, we look around in, other professions, and Other professions have been doing this for years. So what are you seeing happening kind of outside our profession as it relates to this?
Well, I think you're spot on. I mean, look at the tech sector, and they have been doing this for years, and it's on a larger scale. It was on a larger scale in the last year plus, but a pandemic doesn't discriminate between whether it's an accounting firm or some other organization. We were all in this together and being hit by this. And so every organization accelerated their progress and having this flexibility. But you're right that we're not trailblazers. Your firm may be a trailblazer within the profession, but in the grand scheme of things, there's a lot to be learned outside of accounting firms. And I'll go back to the tech and what my comments earlier in terms of recruitment of people. They've been doing this both from acquiring specific talent, but also from a cost of labor. You think about the cost of employees out in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley. Many of those have gone to other places that have strong computer science programs and looked for employees that they can have remote and in their local area and at that price point. So it's not anything new, but it brings up a great point that with any topic we talk about on these, you can learn a lot by looking outside the profession.
Right. And from a talent acquisition perspective, as firms expand their suite of services, as they expand the amount of specialized roles they have within the firm, all of a sudden we're moving more toward, hey, we're not competing with other accounting firms in terms of the best talent. We're now competing with other industries and other companies outside the industry. And if other companies and other industries are more progressive in this area, well, those individuals are going to expect the same from us as well in terms of that kind of flexibility and the ability to work from anywhere. So that's great, Jim. All right. So for our listeners, as we wrap up here, what's your recommended next step? If someone's listening saying, we really need to get moving on this, we really need to start to get our arms around this a little bit better, what's your advice with next steps?
So before I go there, one thing you said, I want to add on my last answer in terms of outside the profession. The other angle on this is all of your clients are outside of the accounting profession,
right,
for the most part. And they're going through this, they're going through many of the same challenges. And if you can think strategically, develop a long-term strategy, that puts you in a place where you can help your clients through this journey as well. So just one point there. So on the question of next steps is, if you didn't really document how you responded or what you did during the pandemic in terms of remote work, you need to start developing that strategy and look at it longer term than just how do we get through the pandemic, and all go back to the way it was. So for most of us, it's refining the plan that we came up with in a reactive state when we were forced to develop it on the fly, but really take a step back and go, look at it again holistically and develop that plan. The other thing I'd say is, don't try to go at it on your own or even within your own four walls. Lean on your peers. That many of them have done things that you haven't even thought of. They're further ahead. You can fast track your learning and your progress by tapping into your peer network. So, whether that's one of our circles or another group of your peers, lean on them, leverage them, just reach out and have a conversation and find out what they're doing. The final thing I'd say is, we have a sample remote work agreement. So I talked about the management and leadership piece, and I think downloading that would be an easy first step. because you're going to have to tweak it and make it your own and customize, but really it'll walk through a lot of the areas that you need to think about and maybe turn some light bulbs on of, oh, that's an important one that we need to make sure we address. So just a few things that that people can do to get started, but started is the key word. Get started.
Yep, absolutely. And I love that sample remote work agreement. We can put that in the show notes here of this episode so people can download that, from our website. So Jim, all great advice. Thank you for taking a few minutes to be on this episode of the Boomer Briefing.
Thanks for having me.
And for those listeners, if you like what you heard today on this episode, please subscribe. We release new episodes every Tuesday morning, and we're constantly shifting through topics on leadership, technology, process, talent, and growth. So please subscribe and be on the lookout for the next episode next Tuesday. Thanks so much.